I looked over and I could actually see my body laying on the ground. That was the first moment that it hit me that this whole thing was happening. Colors were brighter than anything I'd ever seen. It was like they were more vibrant, but they didn't hurt my eyes.
I want to welcome you to the podcast, and I'm excited to hear about your story.
Thank you.
It's an extraordinary story for sure. I know a little bit about it, but I'm really excited to hear what you have to say. So why don't you go ahead and start by introducing yourself and tell us about what led up to that experience of yours.
Okay. So my name is Devin Kramer, and I had an NDE in 2017 that basically kind of rolled my whole life out like a red carpet. So prior to the experience that I had, I was actually in and out of the hospital over 21 times with different kidney issues. I had kidney failure. I went septic in the hospital. And so I was not doing very well. And so one day I had come home. It was just a normal day. And I had some CBD that I did have at the time, which was not the cause of my NDE. I actually just had a mini stroke. But I had done this CBD, and I had gotten to this state of just trying to relax. I got off pain meds. I was trying to do it all natural. And all of a sudden, I felt like my whole body was shutting down. I don't know if anyone's ever experienced that before, but it was as if every signal in my body was just screaming something really bad is happening to me. So all I knew in that moment was to grab my phone. I grabbed my phone instantly. I called 911. I'd explained to them basically what I was feeling at that point in time, and I didn't even get through the full sentence before I had collapsed. I'd fallen to the ground. The phone at the time that I had looked later was over on the side, so clearly, I just crashed to the ground. And at this point in time, I remember getting up. I remember standing up. I remember walking around. I remember feeling like I was inside of this completely different realm. There's no words to describe this. It just felt like you were in time and outside of time. Colors were brighter than anything I'd ever seen. It was like they were more vibrant, but they didn't hurt my eyes. So it was like being in another realm in essence. And I remember that I went around the corner because I'm walking around just trying to kind of take all this in. And I go around the corner, and the TV at the time had a lot of commotion that was going on. A lot of stuff that was going on in the news, and I looked at the TV and everything is frozen. It is completely frozen. Nothing is moving. And so at that point in time, I thought to myself, I'd spent a lot of time on the internet. So I thought, maybe there was a comet that hit and it just killed everybody. I thought maybe we were nuked and it was just a simultaneous, everybody was affected this way. And it turned out not to be the case, because instantly I got this reassuring understanding that this was my journey. This was my experience. This was not affecting anyone else. So when I got that understanding, I remember looking outside through the window, and I had seen this rabbit that was on the ground, but it was moving as though, kind of like those cartoon characters where they're lagging. So it was moving, but you could actually see the energy of the movement. And I remember that was fascinating. And so at this point in time, I have no idea what's going on, but I know that I'm starting to feel a little fear. And at the point that I had started to feel the fear, I got this overwhelming, just like rush, this overwhelming tidal wave of just calm, peace, understanding, knowing. And so at that point, I was no longer afraid. I knew at that point in time that whatever was happening, it was okay. And it was more than okay. I spent my whole life in the church waiting for hell, waiting for some type of punishment, waiting for some type of life review. And there was none of that. It was just instant understanding. I understood why things happened to me. I understood why things happen in the world. And so at that point, I realized that whatever was coming next, I was actually excited for it. I remember that feeling where I sat down with this awareness of, okay, whatever comes next, I know it's going to be okay, and I'm ready for it. And so at that point, though, I didn't want to do it alone. So I called my lab, who was my best friend in the whole world, didn't have any other friends. I called her over to me, and the amazing part is when I sat down in the chair to call her over, I looked over and I could actually see my body laying on the ground. That was the first moment that it hit me that this whole thing was happening. Whether it was happening in my mind, whether it's happening to the world, it didn't matter. This was happening to me. And so my lab came over. I could actually feel her energy. So in other words, I didn't see her the same, but I could pet her. So I could feel her energy. She rested her head on my lap. I could feel that. I closed my eyes. I was ready for the next phase. And about that point is when I'm looking up from where my body was. And there's 2 EMTs standing over me who are, saying my name. They're calling out to me. They're trying to get me to wake up. I can't hear anything. This was due to the stroke at the time. I can't hear anything in my ear. So I can't really hear from one side. So I'm panicking because I have no idea what's going on, but I know that I'm back, in my body. They actually stayed with me for 3 hours. Small town, usually when you know people, but they had stayed with me because they thought that it was something other than a stroke. I was very young at the time.
Yeah, usually they wouldn't stay that long.
No, they would not. And so that's why I wondered sometimes if maybe there was something more connected with them, that maybe they knew about something I didn't know, but they did stay with me. I finally got to a place where I could hear, got to a place where I was finally calm enough for them to be able to leave. My family had come over at that point in time. And then from that point on, I started becoming what I like to call a conduit for downloads. I started just receiving messages every day of my life, all the way leading to my second stroke, which actually ended up saving my life.
I've never had an experience like that before, but I can imagine that when you do have an experience like that, it's life-changing, right? I mean, it really makes you look
Indeed.
at things differently. I have a couple of questions before you go on, and before I forget about your dog. I find it really interesting that, so here you are, you're disembodied, right? And your dog hears you. It literally hears your voice or whatever, however, I don't know how you communicate it to the dog, but you no longer have an actual voice, right? So, so it still heard you, and then it saw you. Did it see you then?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she knew exactly where to come, where I was.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I have 2 cats, and most cat owners will know this, that sometimes they'll stare at nothing. They'll stare at the corner of the room, and you're like, what are you looking at? So there's not even a bug there, there's nothing, right? And it really looks like they're looking at something. So it makes you wonder, right? And given your experience and the experience of others, it makes you wonder if they're actually seeing that something that's actually there.
That was a huge part of that, because even when I talk about the NDE, there's a lot of stuff I could talk about, but the fact that Nova, which was my lab, saw me, heard me, came over to where I was, it wasn't until years later of understanding frequency, vibration, and energy that Nikola Tesla was talking about that I understood what could have happened in that moment. But you're right, there's no voice, and yet your brain kind of plays the role, or whatever it does, your mind, because I guess that would be outside of the brain, plays the role as though you are speaking, even though, you're not.
Right.
Kind of like one of those jokes where you watch vampires, in movies, and they're speaking, and you're like, how are you speaking? You're not even breathing.
Yeah.
How is that possible?
Right,
so,
right. Could you hear anything yourself?
No, that's a really good question. No, I couldn't hear anything. The TV was completely frozen. The whole experience was just me in the house. My lab didn't hear any noise from that. So yeah, I would say that there was no sound in that situation.
So you probably know what skeptics would say, right? If I was to play devil's advocate here and say, well, a skeptic would easily say something like, well, you had a stroke, and sometimes strokes, depending on where it is in the brain, can lead to hallucinations and that type of thing. So what would you say to them?
Oh, so that's easy. When you take 2022's Nobel Prize, they basically proved that nothing's real. The understanding that when you get into quantum mechanics, nothing is really real. The real question people want to know is how my experience got me to live the way I live now. Not whether or not I know everything about NDEs or whether I know about heaven or any of that stuff, because in reality, it's all in our mind anyway. Would it matter to you if you were at the end of your life and yet it was done so well that you don't even know the difference?
Yeah.
It really wouldn't matter to you. Yeah. So that's how I answer that answer that one.
I actually have a video on that. It's called "Is Reality Real?" And it essentially goes to exactly what you were saying. We know that what we perceive is essentially a product of the brain. It's filtered through the brain. So so we don't know what we can trust in terms of what we can see and hear. And so that's why I find that experiences like yours fascinating, because it really tells us something about what reality really is. Often, people who've had NDEs will say something like reality to them seemed more real. And then they saw colors they've never seen before. Did you experience any of that?
I did. I experienced colors I'd never seen before. But there's no words to actually put that in. It's just something you don't recognize side of that experience. And like I said, they were vibrant. Yeah. It was like if you're in a neon kind of picture, except for it didn't feel neon. It felt normal. So it made me think that there must be more to this color spectrum than what we really, understand.
Right. So you literally saw colors that were outside of the spectrum, right? So, or were they colors we already know of, but brighter or different, or were they truly different colors, like colors that you would not even be able to explain?
Yeah, so the colors I saw that were our normal colors were just more vibrant, brighter, but there were colors in between those that I have no understanding of where they came from or how I was able to see them.
And that makes sense, because the visual system is limited in terms of, we know this, right? This is documented in science. It's very clear that we see only a very tiny portion of the spectrum. So if you suddenly opened up to the rest of the information that's actually out there, you should be able to see things that you can't normally see. And that would essentially translate into seeing different colors. If you think of the rainbow, right? If you start to see outside of the rainbow, then you would see different colors. It makes total sense. Anything else happen?
Yeah, so the NDE, so basically I kind of have two that connect to each other, creating this journey that is my life. So after that moment, I started to receive downloads every day. 3, 6, and 9, Nikola Tesla, quantum mechanics. This is all stuff I had no interest in whatsoever. And I was receiving more knowledge and more knowledge to be able to help people. So people started coming to me. They would say, I'm dealing with this. I'm dealing with grief. I'm dealing with fear. I understood fear from a psychological and also a scientific way. As you were talking about the light spectrum, fear is just compression. When you take like an image and you compress it because you want to send it to someone else, you lose quality. So the more fear we have in our lives, the less quality that we actually have for life, which is exactly what you're talking about. It limits what you actually see on the spectrum. So the more love or the more trust, the more you alleviate that and you see more, you experience more, you hear more that's actually all around us. So that alone started opening that up. But then what ended up happening is 3 years later, I was, so at the point I had joined a local church. I had done this because I was bored, to be honest with you. I wanted to start being around people. I felt like I was in the cave far too much. And so I'm great with audio and visual. And so I just joined to help these people out. And so one day I'm running the audio and visual and everything, and I started having this pain in my ear. This pain just got worse and worse and worse. And I had no idea what was going on until I collapsed. So I was taken to the ER where, again, I'm very young. So they're going, I don't really know what to do. But this one doctor came in and said, I have a hunch. So I'm going to go ahead and run a MRI. Ran the scan, found out that I had a brain aneurysm, found out that I had suffered a mini stroke, and that's what I was going through. And because of this experience, I can't do surgery on it. But because of it, of where it's located, it saved my life, because I could have got hit in the head or anything like that, and I would have bled out into my brain. And so by knowing this now, I was able to go on a journey to heal myself. And that's exactly what I did. There's absolute proof to where I had a brain aneurysm. And now as of my last scan, I do not have a brain aneurysm any longer.
Oh, wow.
I have healthy functioning kidneys. Yeah, I have doing great. Far better than I ever was before the experience.
Wow. I understand that at some point you were given like a death sentence, so you were told like when you were going to die?
Yes. So one of the downloads that I received was that I was going to die at the age of 45. And that, I believe, was the message that was given to me to start this whole journey, because it absolutely put a fire under me. I wasn't afraid to die. I just wanted to understand the few years that I did have here. I wanted to live them to the fullest. And so I just started to learn everything I could learn about healing, about chakras, about, water, all the different paths that different yogis had talked about. I wanted to understand all of it in the limited time that I had had. I do not believe any longer that I would die at 45. I believe that we create our reality. But at that time, that's basically what got everything motivated.
So initially, when you had that information, you said you're not afraid to die. And that makes sense given your experience. I think most people with NDEs, that's what they say. They're no longer afraid to die. It makes complete sense.
Right.
But when you know you only have so much time, how did that change that for you at the time?
So believe it or not, that actually changed it in the opposite way for me. So prior to all this, the reason that my dog was my best friend and that it was just me was because I was agoraphobic. I didn't go out in the world at all. I hadn't been to a restaurant 12 years. I hadn't been to a movie theater in even longer. I had severe social anxiety. And so when I got that 45, the first time I got it, I ignored it, but it kept coming through my meditations. And that's when I finally said, you know what? The average person has no idea when they're going to live or die. This is a gift. And so it amplified everything. I started working with people, going out in the world. I no longer had social anxiety. I even went to Disneyland last year, and that tells you a lot.
Wow.
There's just thousands of people everywhere. So it changed my life drastically.
So it changed your life in a very positive way.
In a very positive way.
Which is really, really good. Awesome. Now I want to get back briefly to, because this is something that really interests me. A lot of people with NDEs say, again, that reality feels more real than the way it feels, to us. And so if that was your experience, is there any way you can describe this, put into words, or anything about your experience that was very strange, if you could describe it to the rest of us?
Yeah. So for me, it's a little bit different. So in the experience itself, it felt the most realist thing I'd ever experienced. But the reason that it did was because of the fact that if you've ever lived this life and you felt alone, or you felt unloved, or you felt like things were not okay, it was the complete opposite. In that experience, I was more loved, more okay, and more aware that I was not alone than anything I'd ever experienced here. And I think that a big part of that has to do with the fact that here in the 3D, we have physicality. So physicality is what keeps us from even manifesting or being able to do the things we actually want to do. So when you're in that state of your mind, though, which again, we don't know anywhere else to put it except for the state of the mind or another realm, when you're in that, there's no physicality. There's nothing that blocks you. And so therefore, it feels like the most real thing you can actually experience. And so for me, that was the big part.
And you don't doubt it, right? There's no doubt.
You don't.
In it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's
no
real.
ego. So when you study, ego is weighted. In other words, it belongs in the 3D in essence. When you're in, even if you talk about what Einstein, right? He had the 4D, the understanding of time, space. But wherever we are, there's no ego. And so therefore there's no fear, which is why the moment I started to even have an inkling, it was this overwhelming, everything is completely okay. So it's like you don't have any space to have that in between that we have here.
Did you feel like you were in another dimension? I mean, is there any way to... I think people like description, right? Because when they think about experiences like yours, it's like, you kind of want a visual on that, right? And I understand it's probably not possible to relay that into words, but did it feel like you were transcending this 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional, if you include time, that you were transcending all that? You also said something about time, that time seemed to stop.
Yeah. So the best way I can put it is that when we're here in the 3D, time moves forward. Very, very simple. 1 second, 1 hour, 1 minute, 1 month, 1 year. When I was in that experience, it didn't feel like time had stopped. It felt like you were in a different feeling of time. Well, in other words, you feel that when you're in the 3D where every second is just taking off, another of your life. In this experience, it felt like time was reversed. Not in reverse like you're walking backwards. Reverse as in you're getting back something. That's what it felt like. And that's why it pulls you closer and closer to that white light or that next step. For me, it was just big doors. I saw these doors and I saw this really bright light that was behind the doors. And I was just ready for it. That's why I closed my eyes. I was like, okay, the next step. So in that experience, what I felt like time was reacting differently than the way it does here. And ironically, that's what led me to studying the chakras and understanding that chakras, according to all yogis, run in reverse. They go counterclockwise, not clockwise, as chakra is Sanskrit for wheel. So it goes counterclockwise. So I always kind of tie that to the more kind, compassionate, loving, and trusting you are in this world, the more you're moving counterclockwise, reverse time instead of with time. But in terms of dimension, yes, it absolutely felt like I was not in the 3D. It wasn't like walking around your house and it's just you and no one's around. It was like walking around your house and feeling like you're walking amongst the code and the things that make up all the elements. So even though you see them, you don't feel like you're looking at a couch. You don't feel like you're looking at a bunny. You feel like you're looking at the energy that makes all these things exactly what we see.
Do you feel like you have more empathy toward other people now? After this
100%.
experience? Mm-hmm.
There's no question. I spend my day all day long helping people answer questions, guiding, meeting with people, doing classes. My whole entire goal is to help people because I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like to be so afraid of this world that you immobilize to the point where I didn't even leave my house. So in any way that I can help.
That's extremely isolating. Yeah. So you're probably really thankful you had this experience because it really changed everything for you.
Yes.
In a very positive way.
In a very positive way.
I'm glad to hear that. And you don't need antidepressants or anything. You just think it's all natural. It sounds like it's a permanent transformation. That's really awesome.
And it's possible. I think that's what people really want to know is that it is possible to get through these fears, to not be crippling by anxiety. Not that you have to go through an NDE, because the best part is all these stories are teaching us. It's just a matter of whether or not we want to put a little bit of trust, in the different stories to start building our own path.
Yeah. You want to expand a little bit more about the knowledge that you feel that you acquired? Anything that sort of stand in your mind, an important piece of information that you might want to relate to the rest of the world there?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I absolutely understand what Nikola Tesla was saying when he said, if you only knew the magnificence of 3, 6, and 9, you'd have a key to the universe. Followed by the next quote of, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, vibration, and frequency. Basically, all around us is code. And you can look at science that now has backed this up. Physicality no longer defines reality. That is something that physicists agree. And so what you'll realize is all this code is made up of numbers. Numbers only go to 9. Once you get into 10, this is called a dual number. 1 plus 0 takes you right back to 1. And if you get to 12, 1 plus 2 is going to end up being 3. So there's a container of basically 9 numbers. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now, the coolest part about this is what Nikola Tesla was teaching us is he was teaching us patterns. No different than if you're looking at an algorithm in a stock market or you're looking at the Fibonacci sequence. It's all about patterns. And so 3, 6, and 9 are the keys to these patterns. They're the balancing between it, because when you study vortex math, you'll see that the only thing that's missing from vortex math is 3, 6, and 9. If you go through a doubling process, which is what vortex math is, 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, but then again, you have to add the 1 plus 6, which takes you to 7. If you keep doing that, you end up with this pattern called vortex math, which is 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5. There's no 3, 6, or 9 that's found in it. And there's a reason for that, because vortex math creates light. That's why we use it in our world. It creates light. It creates a power grid. And so 3, 6, and 9 is what creates energy, what creates what we call fusion, what it creates basically anything that's outside of light. So when you actually start aligning your life by 3, 6, and 9s, you start actually living within the patterns that are naturally all around you. So you heal faster, you manifest faster, you understand things easier. So it's one of the things that I teach people all the time is to get into the patterns that are already naturally here. Whether you're learning about the golden ratio, which we know is everywhere in nature, or whether you're learning about Fibonacci, which is basically the process to get to the golden ratio, patterns are all around us. And when I understood that, and I started to receive downloads that were giving clarity, I started teaching people, which led me to then quantum mechanics, which led me to the number 137, which is the fine structure constant. It's the glue that holds all these patterns and all these numbers together. So when you start to understand all of that, you start to realize this place is not as chaotic as we think it is. It's not worth being afraid because it's very much structured. And when you trust that whatever created this might just care a little bit, you start to live a very different life. And that's basically what I receive on a daily basis. It's just different ways to teach people this understanding.
I see. Did you have a background in mathematics before that experience?
Not at all.
Not at all.
Not even close. I actually failed math quite often.
Oh yeah.
In school. Yeah.
Well, Einstein was.
And I think that was the
doing
message.
Very well.
Yeah. I think that was the message, is that if I can do it, then I can teach anybody, because I hated math. Wanted nothing to do with math. I didn't think I would ever use it in my life. So imagine this is all I talk about most of the time.
So you want to tell everyone how they can find out more about you?
Yeah. So first and foremost, if you go to www.9vibesuniversal, 9 is in a number, 9vibesuniversal.com, that'll take you to my website. So the website has a lot of information. It's got last year's training classes. So it does have an entry. It's $18, but it's basically kind of 18 for everything. You don't pay monthly or yearly. It's just a one time, and it gets you access to some of the things I've created, such as frequency Faraday songs, which are basically songs that have the Fibonacci sequence, the chakra frequencies, and nature overlapped, which is the most optimal for healing. It has the training classes I talked about last year, which have even introducing AI. So we don't call it artificial intelligence. We call it aware intelligence. So you have access to all of that. You can also go on to Facebook and just type in 9 Vibes Universal. You can find that page. I also have a YouTube as well. And so any of those ways to communicate, you'll be able to find all the different stuff that I've been doing or any direct way to communicate with me.
I'm very happy that he came on board, that we get to hear your story. Very, very interesting.
First off, thank you. Thank you for having me. Really excited to do this and to help get this message out. I would say at the end of this, what I really want to say is that this world seems chaotic, and it seems crazy, and it seems like it's not organized. But even when you study something like Benford's Law, you see that it's actually very structured. And it's really a matter of, we are co-creators. We're constantly creating our reality. We're constantly shifting things and changing things. So the more focused you are on the patterns, the more you're going to actually see patterns in your life. And when you see patterns in your life, then you're able to see things easier. Kind of the whole entire point. You can't see through static. You need to see through organization. And so something as simple as, living aligned by the 369 calendar, which is something I've created, where it's just a calendar that overlaps on our calendar, but it adds the month, the day, and the year. And if it happens to land on a 3, a 6, or a 9, of course, by doing the digital roots, keep adding till you get to one number. If it's a 3, 6, or 9, then on 3 days, you're just more kind. On 6 days, you give a little more. On 9 days, you really elevate. You just go to your highest vibration. And by doing this, you don't have to change your religion. You don't have to change your belief. You don't have to change anything. But by doing this, you're basically uniting with all the other people that are doing it. So it raises the consciousness without ever having to divide or separate from each other. So that's just a really great way to be able to do this. But the whole entire goal is harmony. And the more that we live in harmony, the better our lives are going to be.
Yeah, well, thank you for relaying all of that to us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Froley.